All right. Today we're going to wrap up our IEP series by talking about some school supports and placements. All of this is going to be individualized to your particular student. So I'm mostly going to give a broad general overview as to what type of placements there are within the least restrictive to the most restrictive environments, and talk briefly about school supports and services that you may find in schools. And then I'll leave time at the end for open forum for questions. Again, I can't get too specific in terms of this type of placement would be perfect for your child. I think if you're feeling at that moment of, that's what I'm looking for, I need to know more specifically what would be beneficial, we should set up a meeting between myself, and I invited Emily a couple of times to kind of talk and speak more freely about her experiences in the CPS system and what would be best for some of the kids that she works with. So we're happy to do that. First off, we're going to go through some classroom categories, also known as placements. Each school, including your home school, that's the school that is closest within your home address, has different levels of placements for special education. So not all of these placements are included in each home school. So there is a likelihood that if your child on the IEP, it's indicated that he or she needs to be at a certain type of placement, and it's not offered at your home school, that your child will be assigned to a different school to attend so that they can receive those placements and those services within that category. So we're going to run through all of these in terms of general education classrooms, both with supports and modifications, the combination between that and a special education classroom, what's termed as a self-contained special ed class, therapeutic school placements, and the final most restrictive is residential care or treatment facilities. I'm also going to send this document to all of you as well. It's just something I found on the CPS website in terms of school assignments, some frequently asked questions that parents have asked, like, how is it determined where they're going to go to school? What if I'm not sure if I want to send my school now? There's a closer school that I think could implement the IEP to its best. How do I get there, or why are they not assigned there? So it answers some of those questions from a CPS perspective that I think would be helpful for you guys to kind of look over. So the first thing is talking again, at the beginning, we talked about what is a least restrictive environment. Every child should be placed in their own least restrictive environment. And this will look different for each kid and each need. There might be some kids that the least restrictive environment is a therapeutic school placement, even though on that, continuum of least to most restrictive environment, that is up there in terms of most restrictive. But for a particular child, that might be the least restrictive environment for them, given behavioral needs or education needs and things like that. The absolute least restrictive environment is going to be your general education classroom. So being with your typical peers, assigned just like they would be, with 20 kids in the classroom with no supports, would be the absolute least restrictive environment. And while that should be a goal for us, we have to also look at what is the goals and the needs of the child, and would that be best served within that environment. So even though as parents, myself included, look forward to the day that is that potential that they could be in a gen ed classroom, we also have to recognize, what would be in the best interest of our child and how can we strive to get them there within the general education classroom. It's important to note that having a one-to-one support aide in a general education classroom is more restrictive than being solo in a special education classroom. So even when you add certain levels of supports and accommodations and modifications, sometimes that can turn your least restrictive environment into a more restrictive environment. This basically means that having a one-to-one is more restrictive. This is why it can be so difficult for kiddos to receive one-to-one supports in class, because it's much more common for them to have a shared paraprofessional in the classroom setting. I wanted to touch briefly about paraprofessional support, not so much to, cause caution to any parent who's going into the IEP process, but to bring awareness of what may happen during an IEP process. They do talk about the need for paraprofessional support, whether that is shared or that person has their own direct one-to-one aid. Currently, for most of our kids in the classrooms in the academy, They do have paraprofessional support in terms of having that RBT with them, implementing their ABA services throughout the day, helping to prompt and shadow them so that they are successful within a classroom environment. So they are receiving that, support within our classrooms. But once they get to school, the likelihood of having that one-to-one aid, somebody who's going to be shadowing and helping them at every turn, may not happen for some of our kids. So part of our experience and process here at the Academy is as they get older and they get into those more levels where they are showing more school readiness, we want to fade out that paraprofessional support in terms of the RBT. And we'll do that physically, like having them sit away from the child and stepping in when they need to, so that they're responding more from the teacher rather than, having that RBT always prompting them and guiding them throughout the time. Is this, possible for every child? Probably not, but we want to make sure that we're setting them up for success so that when they go to school, if they don't have paraprofessional support, they have a recognition of what is going to happen. In CPS, it can be quite challenging to obtain paraprofessional support, as well as in some suburban school districts. People often think that suburbs offer so much more services for kids in the special education system, but that may not always be true and accurate. Many times the paraprofessional support is only provided to those who exhibit severe maladaptive behaviors that impede on the learning of not only that student, but the learning of others, as well as it's a safety concern. So if your child exhibits, physical aggression in terms of hitting, kicking, biting, whether that's to themselves or to others, they may be able to be provided with paraprofessional support just so that they're keeping everybody safe as well as keeping that child safe as well. This support will not be provided for students who generally need help with prompting, such as to initiate a task, to stay on task, or even to complete a task. Oftentimes CPS does not see that as a need for paraprofessional support, that having somebody there to kind of just like, hey, pay attention, get back to task, or hey, it looks like you're lost, how can I help you, kind of things. They want the teachers to provide more of that support to help guide them to initiate the task, stay on task, and continue to attend to it. So just kind of have that in the back of your mind that even though we do provide that support in terms of an RBT, helping them with that, the level of that support may not be present when they get to the school. Generally, again, for those more restrictive maladaptive behaviors that would prevent them from learning just as any other kid, or it's a safety concern, generally that's where you're probably seeing more paraprofessional support being provided to a child. They also have what's called shared paraprofessional support, so like a classroom assistant or a classroom staff member who's in there providing support to 2 or even 3 kids within the classrooms. On the IEP, if it is shared support, they indicate the times and the durations that this person will be providing direct shared support to your child. So most of the time this is happening when there's toileting concerns. A child is not fully toilet trained and they need assistance in the bathroom to help change their underwear, the pull-up garments, or things like that, or with the hand washing process of the toileting, or there's specific needs that are not across long periods of time. They may be provided shared paraprofessional support in the form of a classroom assistant that comes, steps in, provides that support, and then steps back out to go and assist other kids. So the first least restrictive, I'm not going to spend too much time because many of us probably understand what a general education placement is. It's just your basic gen ed classroom without any supports, modifications. It's what we term mostly the typical regular educational experience and placement for our kids. Yes, your kid can be pushed into general education placement. I'm going to talk about that next. In terms of placement with supports and or modifications. So the next level up would be going to the general education setting, but you're still receiving supports in the forms of modifications, accommodations, and or paraprofessional assistance, whether that's a one-to-one or shared paraprofessional. And thinking about this in terms of the continuum is more restricted to be in the setting with a paraprofessional support than it is to be in a special education classroom without that. Going on next is a combination of your general education and special education placements. So they would join the gen ed classroom for certain activities or subject areas. What they used to call specials, so your art, music, gym, lunch, recess, so things that are not very academic in nature, but do provide social interaction and growth within skills of being in the classroom and participating in activities with a kid, but it's more of the fun activities where the demands are still there, but they're not as intense as an academic activity. So kids from the special education classroom can be pushed into those special activities to join their general education peers. And then some kids may also be pushed in for certain subject areas. Some of our kids show great strengths in reading or identifying, words and letters and things like that at a certain grade level, or maybe they're really proficient in their math and they don't need special education services to assist in that area of math growth. So they could be pushed into a certain type of subject, such as math, reading, or even social emotional growth and things of those natures. In addition, they would be placed in the special education classroom to receive the support and individualized subject area content, etc. So they kind of have a dual role. And within the IEP, they would indicate how many minutes are they spending each week in the gen ed classroom and how many minutes are they spending in the special education classroom. When they're in the gen ed classroom, what does it look like? What areas are they going to be, spending time in? Do they need supports and modifications for those time periods? And again, also in the special education placement, what does that look like? And then there are things called a self-contained special education placement. So cluster programs within CPS are designed for students requiring significantly modified curriculum with moderate to intensive supports in a separate classroom from the gen ed's population. So for the majority of the day. So this is looking at over 61% of your day is spent in this special education classroom. Individuals may also need assistance with adaptive skills, such as feeding, toiling, maybe dressing in terms of donning and taking off their coat, backpack, things of that nature. Maybe they have some other adaptive skills with washing hands, just taking over, day-to-day care of themselves. So they'll focus time periods and goals within those adaptive living skills. They're basically removed from the gen ed setting and they're placed somewhere separately. Yes, if it's 61% of the day, there's still, about a little bit of time to be spent that they could be pushed into a certain time period of gen ed. But generally for these kids, you're looking at kids that have more severe to moderate needs, and they need to be separated from the gen ed population because they just wouldn't be as successful within that population. There is a huge push in a lot of the school districts to ensure that kids are still getting access to typical peers so that they're learning from their peers in some way, shape, or form. The next two links, again, I'm going to send those to you guys as well, because they're really good links that are on the CPS website that kind of shows you what these moderate cluster programs are, the names of the schools. There's also a little thing at the bottom that tells you, what level. So primary is your, kindergarten through, I think, third grade, and then moderate or intermediate is looking at anywhere between fourth and eighth. And then upper is your, high school level, or even intermediate might be your middle school level. But it goes through and you can kind of see different schools and identify, this school is looking at kids who have moderate needs and it's the primary level. I should go and check out and see what that school kind of looks like. And then they also have a map for more intensive needs. So for kids who have more intensive needs for services, obviously looking at this map, there's not many schools that offer a lot of services for kids that are on more of the intensive side. But there are some schools listed here that you may or may not need to check out depending on the level of need that your child has. So I'll be sure to send those so you can kind of take a peek to get to know some of the school system within CPS for some of the self-contained special education placements. The next one is therapeutic school placement. And I know like there is, Rush has a really good autism resource link in their, I think on their webpage that can help parents find services and find schools and things like that for their child with autism. And one of the sections is looking at therapeutic school placement. The thing about therapeutic school placement is it's a non-public special education program. So these are basically schools that only house kids that are receiving special education services. When you're looking at the continuum, these are the kids that are not successful within a regular typical school, even when they're separated out into a separate classroom. These are kids who have severe behavior problems, who have very severe needs, or even just need more intensive services to meet their health needs. They could have no behaviors whatsoever, but they need a smaller classroom because of more intense health needs that they have within the school system. They provide educational, therapeutic, and or residential services to students with disabilities. The next step is a residential or a treatment option, but some schools have it combined where they have residential and they have therapeutic school placement. But for the most part in the Chicago area, most of our therapeutic schools just offer the school-based services. They do not offer residential. As I mentioned before, they have severe and possibly complicated educational and clinical needs that the IEP determines that no less restrictive setting on the continuum of alternative placements is appropriate within the home school district to meet the needs of the student. Non-public special education day programs are often referred to as separate day schools or therapeutic day schools. These are schools that CPS or suburban school districts contract out and pay them money. So basically there's a per diem rate, per day rate of, this child is coming to your school, so we need to pay you for these services. Some examples within the Chicagoland area is Giant Steps out in the western suburb. Same with Helping Hand, it's on the western suburb. Easter Shales is in Chicago, 19th and Demon, and then JCFS is up in the north side. JCFS is a Jewish school, but they do accept non-Jewish students. They're very open to everything. But those are some of the, therapeutic school placements. The only way to get in to these schools is to have your IEP state that they need a separate day program to help assist with them. These aren't ones that you can just shop out and be like, I want my kid to go here. But I encourage parents to look at them to, do the research on what a therapeutic school placement is so that you can come armed and ready if that is the placement that you feel that your child would need best in order to make progress on their goals. So that you have an understanding of it when it comes to IEP. When we talk about school placement, what would be the least restrictive. Another thing with therapeutic school placement that I know that Chicago Public Schools and a lot of the suburban school districts are very intensely looking at is how do we get a student out of the therapeutic school placement? So within the IEP conversation, we do spend a lot of time talking about where they're at with their goals, where they're at with their behaviors. At what point in time can we start looking at transitioning them back into another least restrictive environment? And what would that process look like? What would that transition look like? What would that placement look like? And how best do we, conserve them in that? So for any of these placements, that should always be a conversation piece of where is this child at right now and how can we get them to another step in the less restrictive environments. And then the most restrictive setting for a student is within residential care or treatment facility. As mentioned before, residential care sometimes will have a therapeutic day school tied to it or has a contract out with a therapeutic school so that they can work together to ensure that the child is receiving the best services that they need. These, again, are for your most severe kids in terms of their behavioral or educational needs and require a much more intensive setting in order to make that progress. This is another non-public setting, and so they would be tuitioned out. CPS would pay for their tuition to attend one of these facilities. just as they would for therapeutic day school placement. This also may involve attending a school and a residential care treatment facility in a different state if that facility was not found within the state of Illinois. I've had students that have, unfortunately, just due to their behavioral makeup, that we just weren't unable to serve them within a therapeutic day placement. And the parents and the district and his clinical team did determine that he would be served best at a residential care facility for the time being. Unfortunately, the closest that we could find was Nebraska. I'm not saying it's that intense where you can't find something that's bordering the state of Illinois. But there are certain situations once you start, contacting residential care facilities to find out what they have to offer. Do they have space? What does it look like? Does my client's profile meet the needs within this residential care? That you might find them having to go to a different state. Again, this is the most restrictive. I do not foresee at this time period, knowing most of your kids from seeing them at the academy, that they would need or have a need for residential care at this point in time. But just wanting to give you some information that is an option, that if a child is under the age of 22, that if their behavior needs are not being met within the school system and you've reached the max of what the school can provide you in terms of therapeutic placements, that residential care may be needed, and that CPS would pay the tuition for that. And that one's very hard because CPS does not want to give up. I know parents myself would not want to give up on our child. We want to find some option that would be local. The next section I want to talk about is service delivery. Each, just in the same as your homeschool offers different services and things like that, there may be different schools that provide the services that you need, and your child would need to be, tuitioned to that school instead of your homeschool. Services for speech, OT, PT, and social work are usually the top ones that are provided within the school system if your child shows an eligibility for their services. And they can be delivered in the following ways. They could be pushed into the classroom. The child could be pulled out. They could be pulled out individually. They could do pull out for a small group. And then there's consultation. You just need to specify when you're providing consultation who the consultation is with and how many minutes it is, so that it's clear, like, I'm going to have 15 minutes per week of consultation with the teacher, or the OT and speech are going to consult together 15 minutes per month with regards to, executive function goals or something like that. So it's clear what the consultation is going to be about and what the goal is for them to access and complete. You may also hear at an IEP, speech, OT, PT, or social work say things like direct or indirect. And this basically refers to direct services as I'm providing direct services one-on-one or within that small group with the child themselves, or indirect in terms of consultation with others. So it's really just how is the service being delivered, directly to the child or indirectly in terms of I'm talking about the child, but the child is not present. You'll also see them rate it kind of like 60 minutes per week, direct, group or individual, or group and individual. So it gives them some flexibility. 15 minutes per month of indirect consultation with the classroom teacher and they would specify what goals they're being consulted on. Within the nicety of school services in terms of service delivery is that it provides the service provider some flexibility of how they can implement the goal. So right now, for insurance-based purposes, many of our kids are in speech 45 to 60 minutes per week or twice a week or things like that. But we're held to providing the full 45 or the full 60 minutes in that therapy session. Whereas within the school setting, they could do 15 minutes per week. They could do it 3 times a week or 4 times a week so that the child is receiving all 60 minutes. But then that speech therapist can pick and choose, like, I'm going to do 15 minutes where I'm going to push into this circle time activity so I can work on, this goal specifically. And then I'm going to do pull out on this day for 15 minutes where I can more intensely provide this service one-on-one without distractions. So it is nice that there is that flexibility for services in terms of, breaking it down, where they could keep it the same and just see them 60 minutes per week for that full service. Other services that you'll see at therapeutic school placements written into IEPs really depends on what they can offer. I know when I worked at IEP Series, we did not have a PT on site that would be able to provide PT services. So at that point in time, if they are eligible and they needed that service, options would be that they wouldn't be able to come to IEP Series because we didn't offer that, because we didn't have a staff on site at that time, or CPS could provide a PT to come in and specifically provide those PT services on a contract base. So there are ways that they could do it. Also, sometimes what you see at therapeutic schools is that they have music therapists and they have art therapists that are, provided that to kind of bolster up that therapeutic experience for the kids. And you'll see that written into the IEP of how many minutes per week they're provided, what is the goal that they're receiving. So sometimes the benefits of therapeutic school is that they do have some more intensive therapies that are provided that general, regular schools may not offer. At the general schools is they do have music and art, but it's not done by a music therapist or an art therapist. It's provided by a teacher. Okay. The last thing before you open it up to some questions, I wanted to kind of walk you through some of the IEP forms. I'm going to send this link to you, as well as there is a really good IEP presentation from Quip for Equality that was done for the University of Illinois Chicago for their, I think it was for their special education program. So I kind of want to walk through like how to read it a little bit. I'm going to send that presentation to you so you can read it on your own. But I think it's important for you guys to have a little bit of background and kind of, have an idea, because the IEP can be not only daunting, but there is a lot of paperwork that goes into it. So having some idea of, what exactly does it look like will kind of help you understand a little bit further. So I wanted to see if I can pull a couple of these up. So when you're looking at present levels of academic and developmental functional performance, as I stated, you will always have to provide some sort of parental concern and input, whether that's about their academic levels. It can also be about their behaviors, their social skills. You're concerned about where they're going to go when they turn 18, whatever it is, the concerns that you're bringing to IEP should be documented in here line by line. But generally what we start with at the IEP after the sign-in sheet goes around, again, the signature sheet just indicates that you're present during this IEP. It does not mean that you are in agreement or disagreement with the IEP. It just means that you're present for the IEP. They'll go over and talk about the student's strengths. So generally this is a good summary of, how well they're doing, not only academically, but also behaviorally, social, emotionally. How are they doing with their motor skills, their adaptive living skills? Each of the speech, OT, whatever services that they're receiving will also provide their input in terms of student strengths. So we should all be having a good summary as to what the student is doing really well in. They'll also go through and talk about present levels of academic performance, strengths, and areas that need improvement. So going through, English, math, social studies, science, whatever the learning standard is that they need to focus on, they'll talk about not only how are they doing, but also areas that they need improvement. Same thing for functional and developmental performance. So this is looking at functional living skills, adaptive living skills, things of that nature. How are they doing and what do they need to do to improve that? They'll also have a results of the initial or most recent evaluation of the student, just a brief summary of what those results look like. And again, at this point right here, you're going to describe the effect of the individual's disability on their involvement and progress in the general education curriculum. So what does that look like? How is this student's disability impact their ability to improve on certain academic areas? They have it broken down by two levels, one for, younger kids, and then those that are 14 and a half and older. Again, once you get to 14 and a half and older, you're starting to talk about transition. So what is it going to look like once they're done with high school, post-secondary, employment? What is that going to look like for them? And how is their disability impacting that area for them? The next one I wanted to show is, again, you'll get all of this here, so you'll be able to kind of see everything for your own to kind of click through and go through for this experience. Educational accommodations and supports, there are at the beginning some check boxes that are for more specific needs, like if your child uses assistive technology, and this includes their augmentative communication devices. If it is, then specify yes, that they need it, or no, specify why they don't need it. Are they deaf or hard of hearing? Check yes or no. Is English a second language for them? Yes or no. Are they blind or visually impaired? Yes or no. And then the last one indicates behavior needs. Does their behaviors impede the student's learning or the learning of others? If yes, then they need to come up with a functional behavior assessment and a behavior plan. If no, then it stops there. You don't have to go any further for writing up a plan. Looking at cultural accommodations, does the student require any accommodations to meet his or her linguistic and or cultural needs? And then special education and related services will be provided in a language that the child can understand in addition to, other than or in addition to English. The next one for kids that are deaf or hard of hearing, they indicate, what is their language and communication needs. And list opportunities for with peers, what's this look like, and identify the mode of communication. Supplementary aids, accommodations, there's a section for all of that. And then supports for school personnel. Are there program trainings and or supports for school personnel that are needed for the student to advance appropriately towards attaining the annual goals, participate in the general education curriculum, and be educated and participate with other students in educational activities? If yes, indicate what they are. This section I think is very important in terms of you advocating to ensure that school personnel are adequately trained in what it is to work with a kid with autism. There are other kids within the school district that have special education needs in terms of other disabilities identified. But I think it's important for school personnel to have an understanding of what it is to have autism. What does that look like? How does that impact their ability to access their classroom and their peers and things like that? I think it's important for people to have more specific training on that, because often people don't know what it is and they don't know how to react to kids. So I think it's important for them to have some level of training within the classroom to help support your child more specifically. Let's see. And then the last one I wanted to kind of show you was the goal page, because it can kind of be a little overwhelming. Oh, and I want to show the school placement one. So this looks really overwhelming in terms of everything, because there's a bunch of, check boxes and what does this look like? But for every goal that the child has, goals are only written for when there is a need for a person to have a goal. So if your child is at a grade level for reading or math or anything like that, there may not be a reading or math goal or objective for them to meet. It's really looking at what areas they're in a deficit and what they need to be supported with. They try to tie the goals and objectives to a learning standard. That's very important to show that we are trying to meet the learning standard. But just know that most of the goals, like there may be right here in this section, there may be a learning standard that's been identified, but the goal may not directly be word for word with that learning standard. Because if our kids were, at the learning standard level and meeting all of that, they would not need special education services and need goals. to meet those. So they're going to take those learning standards to kind of modify them so that whatever we're working on would meet the need for that learning standard. Again, all goals need to have some present level of performance written out, like where are they at towards this particular service area. There's the goal statement, the title of who would be implementing this. And you'll often see, of course, the classroom teacher, but maybe the speech person is also implementing this goal to help them. Or maybe the speech person is consulting on this goal because it's a language goal and they want to make sure that their kid has the support of a speech therapist. And then below that is what's called benchmarks. And these are basically smaller portions of the goal to meet the annual goal. So sometimes these match up with the annual goal, and sometimes it may be like, well, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's not even tied to the annual goal. It looks like it's something different. But trust me that there are systems in place to ensure that whatever they're working on, the short-term goal, it's leading up to the larger annual goal. And the benchmarks are worked on every quarter. So quarter one would be this one, quarter two would be the second one, and quarter three would be the last one. And then quarter four, they should be able to be working on a final portion of that goal statement. So it all kind of works together, but it also tells you, how are we determining success? Are we taking data daily? Are we taking it weekly? Are we reporting on it quarterly? How are we evaluating that that way? What are the dates that they're reviewed? So this would be the date that the teacher put in, like on, 3/25, 2024, he, is meeting this short-term goal. It also gives you an evaluation criteria. You want to make sure that the goals are SMART in terms of specific, measurable, achievable, relatable in time, so that it all comes together and it makes sense for the kids. You don't want somebody to be like, I need them to identify all letters of the alphabet. And you're like, well, how many times? And, what are they going to do with that information? Those are good goals, but we need to expand on it to make sure that it's specific for the needs of the child. And the last one, kind of tying in what we were talking about, educational services and placement, is this page. And it talks about, what is their participation in general education classrooms? What is their participation in special education classrooms and services? It also has a section for related services outside of the general education, both down here and probably up here in this section. And those related services are the ones of, speech, OT, PT, all of that. They will be indicating how many minutes per week they'll be spending in that setting of the general education classroom or the special education. So this kind of goes through and just talks about how many minutes per week will they be spending in each of these areas. If this right here, general education with no supplementary aids, is not the appropriate placement for the child, then you should see 0 minutes per week. So it should have how many minutes per week they'll be spending in each of these settings, starting with the least restrictive setting that is appropriate for the child. And then they talk about total bell-to-bell minutes. This just means how many minutes per week are they spending start to finish in each of these. And then at the very bottom, it talks about educational environment considerations. You should always talk about at the IEP what environment settings is most appropriate for the child, and why are we saying, no, that's not appropriate. So if they click no here, they need to give an explanation of why that child is not appropriate for that area. And then placement considerations, same thing down here. Placement options that were considered, potentially harmful effects, reasons rejected, and did the team accept that placement? So looking at all of the different levels of least restrictive environments and what does that look like? Transportation, your kid, depending on how far they are from the school, would be transported via a bus. Unless you as a parent say, nope, I'm going to transport them myself, then you have that option to transport them yourself, and the school would not provide transportation for that. There is a section here for specialized equipment, such as special or adaptive buses, lifts, ramps is required. If your child has a seizure disorder and their seizures are triggered by heat, so hot areas, hot buses, more specifically, you want to make sure that you're clicking yes and explaining the detail for the transportation plan. You will need documentation from your doctor indicating that your child's seizures are triggered by heat in order to have an air-conditioned bus. So not all of our buses within the Chicago schools are air conditioned, or can be, like, yay, I've got this all the time. So if your child medically needs something specific with a bus, such as an air conditioned bus, you'll need to provide medical documentation to indicate that, so that it can get approved in the IEP. Also, sometimes they will ask you, depending on, especially for if your child goes to a therapeutic school, just because there are not many in the Chicago land area in terms of city of Chicago, and they need to be bussed out to, say, Helping Hands or something like that over out in the west suburbs. They will ask you, are you comfortable with your child being on the bus for longer than an hour? Because obviously with traffic coming from the city of Chicago all the way out there, it would be longer. It could be longer than an hour, and you have to consent yes. If you consent no, then obviously Helping Hand may not be the best option for your child. So you still have some time to kind of talk about transportation and what that looks like, but wanted to put that out there, that if your child does need some specialized services for bus in terms of air conditioning because of a medical condition, you do need to provide medical documentation for that. And then extended school year services. This is offered to each kid with a special education for special education services, but you could say, no, I don't want them participating in the extended school year. The school may say, yes, they need to, in terms of these are the services that they need to be provided during those time periods, but you can decline receiving extended school year services. They may also, if it's, sometimes I've seen this in IEPs where it's too soon to determine whether or not extended school year services is needed. They may say no at the time, and then they should put some explanation here indicating that this will be discussed, May of 2025 or something like that, to kind of jumpstart the process for the extended school year. So that's kind of the bulk, not total bulk, but that would be the bulk of some of the forms. There's a summary report just summarizing everything that's happened. Some of these evaluation results, eligibility, determination forms, those are more specifically for that evaluation process that happens before the IEP. So those are those forms. Looking at secondary transition for kids who are 14 and a half and up, what does that transition plan look like and entail? There's also progress reports in here. If your child, which I believe most of us on this call today have autism, they're also required to fill out the autism considerations for each of these, like what is the student's needs and what supports have been identified to meet that student's need with autism. So that's kind of, if your child does not have autism, you will not be filling this out, but they do need to provide autism considerations for any kid that has the diagnosis of autism written into their IEP. I think those are the basic ones. But as noted before, the sign-in sheet at the front just tells you, that you're just there present, but at the end, if you're not in agreement, like, make sure you communicate that out, whether that's in writing or you verbally state it. I've always been a fan when parents come in and they, verbally say what they're in disagreement with, but then also physically write a note down so that it documents all of your concerns. And then the last quick thing that I want to show. And again, not going to get into too big of it because it's a pretty big presentation. But it does like how to read a student's IEP under from Equip for Equality. So it kind of goes through some of the law terms that we talked about at the very beginning. What is an IEP? And this is what it looks like. And then they go section by section and kind of just talk about, you know, what is each section, this is what it looks like and things like that. So that you have just kind of a little cheat sheet all together in that presentation. So I thought it was a really nice presentation to kind of go through and look through and, you know, provide to you guys as well for a little bit. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.